There's a moment, just before a storm breaks, when the air goes perfectly, unnervingly still. The trees stop whispering. Birds fall silent. The sky turns the color of old bruises. And the world, for one breathless instant, seems to hold itself in suspension, as though the universe is deciding something. That moment came for humanity in the 19th century, and it lasted 20 years. Imagine the world before electricity. Not the absence of convenience, the absence of safety. Darkness was not romantic. Darkness was the hour when fire spread through wooden cities, when children coughed in lamp smoke, when factories fell quiet and human ambition was chained to the rhythm of the sun. The night was something to be survived. Every civilization since the first sparks of fire had lived inside that truth, from the oil lamps of ancient Egypt to the gaslit boulevards of Victorian London. Light had always meant danger, the constant whispering thread of flame, a tipped candle, a leaking pipe. A single moment of carelessness could dissolve an entire street into ash and screaming. This was the world that waited. This was the world that two extraordinary, tormented, brilliant men would shatter and reshape in their own image. One of them was already famous. The other was still dreaming. Thomas Alva Edison was not a man who walked into rooms. He occupied them. He was broad-shouldered, restlessly energetic, and possessed of a certainty so dense it seemed to distort the air around him. Born in Milan, Ohio, in 1847, he had grown up poor, partially deaf, and ferociously hungry, not for wealth exactly, but for the sensation of being right, of being undeniable. By the 1870s, he had already remade the world once. The phonograph, the carbon microphone, the telegraph improvements that turned his name into a kind of American myth. He built his laboratory in Mellon Park, New Jersey, and called it an invention factory, and he meant it literally. He did not believe in inspiration. He believed in labor, in grinding repetition, in the 1,000 failures that paved the road to a single success. His teams worked through nights. They worked through illness. They worked because Edison worked, and Edison never stopped. When he finally held a working incandescent light bulb in his hands in October of 1879, the world tilted slightly on its axis. Here was light without fire, light without smoke, light that could be switched on and off with a gesture, clean and obedient and silent, light that could, theoretically, be piped into every home, every street, every corner of human civilization like water through a pipe. Edison stood at the edge of that possibility and felt something that, in a lesser man, might have been called awe. In Edison, it was called opportunity. Now imagine a different man, younger, thinner, a man who carried himself with the fragile intensity of someone perpetually on the verge of either a revelation or collapse. Nikola Tesla arrived in New York City in June of 1884 with 4 cents in his pocket, a recommendation letter, and a mind so extraordinary it almost didn't fit inside a human skull. He had grown up in Serbia, the son of a priest, trained in engineering in Austria, and somewhere along the years of study and solitude had arrived at an understanding of electricity that no one else yet possessed, not as a tool, not as a phenomenon to be harnessed, but as a language, a fundamental grammar of the universe that, if you listened closely enough, you could learn to speak. Tesla had a peculiar relationship with thought itself. He did not sketch his inventions. He built them inside his mind, rotating them in 3 dimensions, testing them, running them, identifying their flaws, all in the architecture of pure imagination. By the time his hands touched metal, the machine was already complete, already real, already running in some interior world only he could see. When he arrived at Edison's door, the recommendation letter read, "I know 2 great men. One is you, the other is this young man." Edison looked at the quiet, hollow-cheeked Serb across his desk and saw something useful. He could not have known what he was inviting inside. For a time, they worked in the same orbit. Tesla labored for Edison, brilliant and tireless, improving the direct current dynamos that formed the backbone of Edison's electrical empire. He worked 18-hour days. He solved problems others had abandoned. He delivered results that, by any measure, should have earned him the promised bonus. $50,000, a fortune then, that Edison had dangled like a lantern in the dark. When Tesla asked for the money, Edison laughed. Not cruelly, exactly. It was a laugh of a man who had forgotten that other people had feelings worth accounting for. Tesla, he said, in some approximation of what witnesses later recalled, "You don't understand American humor." Tesla did not argue. He simply left. And in leaving, he took with him the idea that would detonate the entire electrical world. The fundamental conflict between these two men was not personal, though it became intensely so. It was not even strategic, though armies of lawyers and lobbyists would soon make it that. At its core, it was a disagreement about the nature of truth. Edison believed in direct current. In D.C., electricity that flows in one direction, steady and controllable as a river. His entire empire was built on it. The generating stations, the copper cables, the bulbs, the meters. He had invested everything, his money, his reputation, his identity, into a world lit by direct current. And direct current had one brutal, unforgiving limitation. It faded with distance. To power a city with DC, you needed a generating station every mile, maybe less. The copper cables would have to be buried everywhere, the infrastructure staggering in its cost and complexity. Direct current was a system built for dense city centers, for the wealthy blocks of Lower Manhattan, where Edison's Pearl Street station already hummed and glowed. But for the vast, sprawling American continent, for the farms and the prairies and the mountain towns, it was a dead end. Tesla saw this with crystalline clarity. Alternating current, AC, was different. In AC, the flow of electricity reverses direction many times per second, cycling back and forth in a rhythmic pulse. This seemingly counterintuitive property, which confused and alarmed many engineers of the era, gave alternating current a profound advantage. It could be transformed, stepped up to enormous voltages for long-distance transmission, then stepped back down for safe use in homes. With AC, a single generating station could light an entire region, could light a state, could, in theory, light a continent. Tesla had built a working AC motor in his mind years before he built it with his hands. And when it worked, when the rotating magnetic field spun its copper rotor with silent, precise, elegant power, he understood that he was not holding an invention. He was holding the future. The man who saw this too was George Westinghouse. Industrialist, engineer, a man of formidable practical intelligence who had already changed American transportation forever with the invention of the air brake for trains. Westinghouse met Tesla in 1888, listened to him speak for a single afternoon, and made a decision. He bought Tesla's AC patents. All of them, for $250,000 in royalties that, had they ever been fully paid, would have made Tesla the wealthiest man in American history. The war had its two sides now, Edison and his direct current empire, Westinghouse and Tesla's alternating current revolution, and between them, the electrical grid of the entire industrialist world, waiting to be claimed. Edison did not take this quietly. What followed was one of the most extraordinary and disturbing propaganda campaigns in the history of technology. Edison understood, with the instincts of a born showman, that the battlefield was not the laboratory. It was not the boardroom. It was a human imagination. It was fear. His strategy was elegant in its brutality. If he could make the public believe that alternating current was inherently, lethally dangerous, if he could brand it with terror, then no rational city government, no sane homeowner would ever accept its installation. He began with animals. In the late 1880s, Edison associates began staging public demonstrations in which stray dogs, then calves, then horses were lured onto metal plates and killed with bursts of alternating current. The demonstrations were explicit. They were horrifying. They were meant to be. The newspapers covered them. The public recoiled. Edison even coined a term. To be electrocuted with alternating current, he suggested, should be called being Westinghouse. He was a man who had built civilization's most hopeful gift of the night, now standing in a field, watching animals die, in service of protecting his investment. The distance between invention and corruption is sometimes very short, but the darkest chapter of the War of Currents was yet to come. In 1888, New York State was searching for a more humane method of execution than hanging, which was slow, unreliable, and, in its failures, grotesque. A dentist named Alfred Southwick had witnessed an accidental electrocution and believed he had found the answer. He proposed an electric chair. The question was, which current should power it? Harold Brown, an electrical engineer with close ties to Edison, campaigned ferociously for alternating current. The argument was cynical and precise. If AC was deemed powerful enough to execute criminals, it would be synonymous with death in the public mind. Edison provided laboratory space. He provided equipment. He quietly, carefully, never publicly, helped ensure that the first electric chair ran on a Westinghouse AC generator, a machine the execution team had to purchase secondhand, in disguise, because Westinghouse refused to sell one for purpose. On August 6, 1890, William Kemmler became the first man executed by electric chair at Auburn Prison in New York. It did not go cleanly. The witnesses, doctors, reporters, officials, left the room shaken and pale. One reportedly said it was the most terrible thing he had ever seen. George Westinghouse, when told of it, said quietly, they would have done better with an axe. Edison had his headline, AC had been used to kill a man. And still, the tide was turning against him. The pivot came not in a courtroom, not in a laboratory, but under an open sky, on the shores of Great Lake, in the glittering, impossible fever of an American World's Fair, the World's Columbia Exposition. Chicago, 1893. It was conceived as a monument to human progress, a city of white marble and electric light built on the shores of Lake Michigan, designed to announce to the world that the 20th century would belong to America. 200,000 incandescent bulbs. Edison bid to light them with DC. His number was staggering. Westinghouse bid with Tesla's AC system. His number was less than half. The contract went to Westinghouse. And on the night of May 1st, 1893, President Grover Cleveland pressed a golden telegraph key, and the White City blazed alive. 27 million people would walk through that fair before it closed. They would ride Tesla's AC-powered elevated railway. They would stand beneath the light of 200,000 bulbs powered by alternating current and feel something shift inside them, some primal calculus of what was possible, what was safe, what the future might actually feel like. Tesla himself stood in the exhibition hall and performed demonstrations that left audiences stunned to silence. He held a glass tube in each hand, no wires, no connections, and passed millions of volts of high-frequency AC through his own body, lighting the tubes with cold fire. He was calm. He was smiling. His eyes held the distant, satisfied expression of a man listening to music only he could hear. The war was effectively over. The final, physical confirmation came 2 years later, at Niagara Falls. For centuries, the falls had thundered in magnificent, wasteful splendor. 20 million gallons of water per second, crashing into the gorge below, releasing energy that no human civilization had ever found a way to capture. Engineers had dreamed about it for decades, the sheer, impossible scale of it. In 1895, Westinghouse and Tesla built the world's first large-scale AC hydroelectric power plant at Niagara. 2 massive AC generators, each one a direct descendant of the motor Tesla had built in his mind years before in a park in Budapest, where it had first seen the rotating magnetic field as a vision in the setting sun. The turbines turned. The current rose through transformers to a voltage that would have killed anyone who touched it, then traveled 22 miles of copper wired to the city of Buffalo, arriving clean and strong and ready to light homes, run factories, power the electric streetcars that were already remaking how cities moved. When the switch was thrown on November 16, 1895, a reporter wrote that the lights of Buffalo came on like a second sunrise. Thomas Edison's empire of direct current did not collapse that night. It faded over years, the way empires always fade, slowly, then all at once. But what of the men themselves? Westinghouse would face financial ruin in the panic of 1907 and lose control of the company he had built. He died in 1914 in relative obscurity, the scale of his achievement not yet fully visible to the world that lived inside it. Edison, extraordinary, relentless, deeply human Edison, would live until 1931, long enough to see his own early electrical system dismantled and replaced. He pivoted, as he always had, finding new fields, new problems, new inventions. He was not a man who could be still. He left behind over 1,000 patents, and a world so thoroughly reshaped by his genius that it becomes nearly impossible to separate his legacy from the fabric of modern life. And Tesla. Tesla moved to New York. He lived in hotels, moving from one to another as his debts accumulated, and his grandiose visions outpaced the willingness of any investor to fund them. He dreamed of wireless power, of transmitting electricity to the earth itself freely to every human being on the planet. He built a great tower at Wardenclyffe on Long Island and watched it defunded, abandoned, eventually demolished. He dreamed of a world peace ray, of resonant frequency machines that could split the earth, of communication with other worlds. In his final years, he lived alone in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel, eating only honey and warm milk, feeding the pigeons from his window with a tenderness that those who witnessed it found almost unbearable to watch. He had given the modern world its electrical skeleton, the AC motor, the polyphase system, the radio, a priority still disputed and still, in full truth, belonging to him. And the modern world had given him nothing. He died alone in January 1943. He died in debt. The FBI came for his papers before the body was cold. There's a question that the story asks, though it never quite speaks it aloud. We tend to build our myths of progress around the clean arc, the genius who fights, the truth that wins, the world that improves. And the truth does win, sometimes. AC current powers your home tonight. Tesla's polyphase system is in the wall beside you, humming with a frequency he determined and the world adopted. But the men who carry the future inside them do not always survive the carrying of it. Edison, for all his ruthlessness, for all the calculating cruelty of the war of currents, was not a villain. He was a man who had built something real and true and useful, and watched it become insufficient, and could not make peace with that. He was human in the most recognizable, most painful way. He was afraid. And Tesla, luminous, solitary, reckless Tesla, was not simply a martyr. He was a man undone by the distance between his vision and his ability to inhabit the world as it actually was. He could model the rotation of a magnetic field in his mind with perfect precision. He could not model the rotation of human ambition, of financial interest, of the terrible, grinding pragmatism of the world. He could light the sky. He could not light his own room. What the war of currents really was, beneath the propaganda and the politics and the showmanship and the grief, was the story of how the future gets made. Not cleanly, not fairly, not according to any law of merit or justice or narrative elegance. The future gets made in a collision of visions, in the friction between those who protect what already exists and those who can see what must replace it. It gets made in boardrooms and courtrooms and world's fairs and execution chambers. It gets made at the expense of some of the finest minds that ever try to understand it. The light that falls through your window tonight, the light that holds the darkness back so effortlessly you perhaps never stop to marvel at it, was not given to you. It was fought for. It was wept for. It was built by men who broke each other and themselves in the building. Every time you flip a switch and the darkness retreats, something of that war survives. Something of Edison's refusal to yield. Something of Westinghouse's cold, practical courage. And something of Tesla, something strange and bright and solitary, lives in the current that answers your hand. The war ended. The light remained. And somewhere in the vast and humming silence between one moment and the next, the future is already being built by people who cannot yet afford a room they are dreaming in. Asterisks sit with that. The greatest revolutions do not announce themselves. They arrive quietly in the hands of people the world has not yet learned to see. Asterisk.